We're following a developing story at 5. The BCA has issued an Amber Alert for a 5-year-old girl from Watkins.
In the small, quiet town of Watkins, Minnesota, the evening of Thursday, August 25, 2016, settled over the Ertl family home with a comfortable familiarity. Inside, the house was filled with the sounds of a happy family life. Matt and Kayla Ertl were enjoying a relaxed evening with their 5-year-old daughter, Elena. Also, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? What city are you in? And what's the time and weather like where you are right now? It's always interesting to hear how this story reaches people all over the world. I'm really happy you're here with me. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new stories. A little girl known to everyone as a bright, bubbly Spitfire with an infectious laugh. They were not alone. Visiting with them was Zachary Anderson, a 26-year-old man Matt knew well. Anderson wasn't a stranger. He was a trusted coworker and a family friend. He and Matt worked together, sharing the daily grind and the easy camaraderie that comes with it. On this particular evening, Anderson had come over to the Ertl's house, and the atmosphere was light and unremarkable. He played with Elena, engaging with the 5-year-old in a way that gave her parents no cause for concern. To them, he was just a friend, spending time with their family. As the evening wore on, the conversation flowed easily. They decided Anderson would spend the night, a casual arrangement made without a second thought. He would sleep on the couch in the living room. For Matt and Kayla, this was a simple act of hospitality for a friend. There were no warning signs, no strange behaviors, and no unsettling moments to hint at the darkness lurking beneath Anderson's friendly exterior. It was, by all accounts, a completely normal night.
We're learning new details about the hours leading up to the kidnapping of Elena Ertl.
Investigators found the 5-year-old's body in a swamp not far from a cabin in Motley on Saturday afternoon. Zach Anderson, who has been charged in Elena's murder, had drinks with her parents the night before. WCCO's Jennifer Merrily takes us through the timeline of events.
Matt Ertl and Zach Anderson arrived together at Riverside Tavern in Forest City on Friday night around 10:30. They came after a softball game. The team, the River Rats, is sponsored by the bar. I'm told Matt and Zach are regulars on Friday nights after softball. On the 19th, they played the jukebox and hung out. Zach had about 2 beers in 2 hours. He paid in cash. The bar closes at 1, and that's when they left. The two had a driver. From there, the group arrived at Gordy's Bar in Watkins around 1:30, just blocks from the Ertl home. Elena's mom, Kayla, was also there. Zach bought the Ertls a beer or two. He drank vodka Red Bulls. The bar only takes cash. They joked around and told stories. Zach talked about how he loves to hunt at his family cabin, the same cabin where police later found him and discovered Elena's body. The group ordered a pizza and took it to go. The bar closed at 2. They stayed until about 2:30. According to the statement of probable cause, that's the same time Kayla Ertl moved Elena to her bedroom. That's the last time she saw her. Matt Ertl got home around 2:30. Anderson arrived between 3:30 and 3:45. He and Matt talked until about 4 in the morning when Matt retired for the evening. By 8:30 a.m., Elena and Anderson were missing.
Around 10 p.m., with Elena tucked safely in her bed and the house beginning to quiet down, Matt and Kayla said their goodnights. They left Zachary Anderson in the living room and retreated to their own bedroom, closing the door behind them. They fell asleep with the peace of mind that comes from being in your own home, surrounded by family, with a trusted friend under the same roof. The house fell silent, holding no outward sign of the unimaginable betrayal that was about to unfold in the dark. The sun began to rise on Friday, August 26th, casting a pale light into the Ertl home. Matt Ertl woke up to an unsettling silence. The usual morning sounds of a 5-year-old stirring, the small footsteps on the floor, were absent. A prickle of unease cut through the early morning calm. He got out of bed and went to check on Elena. He pushed open the door to her room, and his heart stopped. Her bed was empty. The blankets were disturbed, but she wasn't there. A wave of confusion washed over him. Perhaps she had gotten up early and gone downstairs to watch cartoons. He moved through the quiet house, calling her name. Elena? The silence that answered him was heavy and wrong. He walked into the living room, expecting to see her curled up on the couch, maybe near where their guest had been sleeping. But the couch was also empty. Zachary Anderson was gone. The blanket and pillow they had given him were still there, but the man himself had vanished. Now, a sharp, cold dread began to take hold. Matt's mind raced, trying to piece together a scenario that made sense. Had Anderson woken up early and taken Elena to the park? Had they gone for a drive? But the illogic of it was suffocating. Nothing explained why they would leave without a word, so early in the morning. His search became more frantic. As he went from room to room, his calls for his daughter growing more desperate. He glanced out the window, looking for Anderson's vehicle, and the dread solidified into sheer terror. Anderson hadn't driven his own car there, but Matt's white Chevy Silverado pickup truck, which had been parked right outside, was gone. The reality of the situation crashed down on him. Anderson hadn't just left. He had taken Matt's truck. In a final, sickening realization, Matt looked for his cell phone, which he had left in the living room the night before. It was also missing. The pieces clicked into place, forming a horrifying picture. His daughter was gone, his friend was gone, and his truck and phone had been stolen. The benign hospitality of the previous night had curdled into a parent's worst nightmare. Overcome with a panic he had never known, Matt grabbed another phone and dialed 911, his voice trembling as he reported that his 5-year-old daughter had been taken. The 911 call from the Erdl home shattered the morning quiet at the Meeker County Sheriff's Office. A report of a missing 5-year-old, potentially taken by an adult in a stolen vehicle, is one of the highest priority calls a department can receive. Instantly, the case became an all-hands-on-deck emergency. Deputies were dispatched to the residence in Watkins, where they were met by a distraught Matt and Kayla Erdl. The officers worked to calm the terrified parents while systematically gathering the critical details. They confirmed the sequence of events. A trusted friend had stayed the night, and now both he and their daughter were gone, along with the family truck. The facts were stark and terrifying. Sheriff Brian Cruz and his investigators knew they were in a race against time. Every minute that passed decreased the chances of finding Elena unharmed. The information provided by the Erdls was clear and actionable: a specific child, a named suspect, and a detailed description of the stolen vehicle. The case met the stringent criteria for the most powerful tool in a child abduction investigation. The decision was made swiftly. They would issue an Amber Alert. At 11:15 a.m., the alert blasted across Minnesota. Cell phones buzzed with an urgent notification. Electronic highway signs lit up with the grim message. News channels interrupted their programming. Suddenly, the search was no longer confined to Meeker County. It was a statewide manhunt.
Littlefield Liz Collin is off tonight. We are following a developing story at 5. The BCA has issued an Amber Alert for a 5-year-old girl from Watkins. This is Elena Erdl, and she was last seen at her house at 2 in the morning. According to investigators, families say they noticed her missing about 8 this morning. Who was staying overnight was also missing. This is 23 Anderson. They believe he works with the girl's father. According to police, Anderson has no sex offender history, and they aren't sure of a motive. Family says Anderson took their truck, which had a cell phone. The phone last pinged in Todd County around 9 this morning, and it has since been shut off. The BCA says that Anderson now has a shaggy short beard and may be wearing a black t-shirt like this that says Riverside, Minnesota softball. Maybe a white 2002 GMC Sierra, number 107. If you have any information about the whereabouts of Elena Anderson, you are asked to call 911 immediately and do not confront the suspect.
The public was now an army of lookouts, tasked with finding a white 2002 Chevy Silverado pickup truck with Minnesota license plate 107 KMT. The alert painted a clear picture for the public. They were looking for Elena Erdl, a small 5-year-old girl with sandy brown hair. The suspect was Zachary Todd Anderson, a 26-year-old man. His photo, alongside Elena's, was broadcast across the state. With the activation of the Amber Alert, the quiet, personal tragedy of the Erdl family had become a public crisis. The clock was ticking, and every law enforcement officer and citizen in Minnesota now knew that a little girl's life hung in the balance. While the Amber Alert mobilized the eyes and ears of the public, a specialized team of investigators focused on a different kind of trail, a digital one. In the modern age of law enforcement, a suspect on the run almost always leaves an electronic footprint. In this case, Zachary Anderson had inadvertently provided investigators with two. He had taken Matt Erdl's cell phone, and he was carrying his own. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, was brought in to assist local authorities, lending their expertise in technical surveillance. Their first priority was to ping both devices, a process that uses cellular network data to approximate a phone's location by triangulating its signal between cell towers. The first phone to yield a clue was the one belonging to Elena's father. The pings from Matt Ertl's phone led investigators to a specific area near a cell tower just a few miles from the Ertl home. It was a clear sign that Anderson had likely discarded the device shortly after leaving the house, a crude attempt to cover his tracks and prevent being followed. A search team was dispatched to the location, and soon enough, they found the stolen phone abandoned by the roadside. The discovery confirmed Anderson's direction of travel, but also signaled that he was aware he could be tracked, making the search more challenging. With the first phone recovered, the entire focus shifted to Anderson's personal device. The BCA continued to ping his phone, and the data began to paint a disturbing picture. The signal wasn't heading toward a major city or a populated area. Instead, it was moving steadily northward, deep into the rural, wooded expanses of central Minnesota. Each new ping showed him moving further away from Watkins, further into remote territory. The digital trail led them specifically toward Cass County, an area known for its lakes, forests, and sparse population. It was the kind of place where someone could easily disappear. The electronic breadcrumbs were leading law enforcement directly to Anderson, narrowing the massive statewide search to a specific, isolated corner of Minnesota. The manhunt was no longer a blind search. It had a destination. The digital breadcrumbs from Zachary Anderson's cell phone did not lead to a random point on a map. They led investigators to a very specific and familiar location, a secluded property near the small town of Leader in Cass County. It was a rustic family cabin, nestled deep in the woods and owned by Anderson's parents. It was a place he knew intimately, a perfect hideout far from the immediate search zone. By mid-afternoon, a formidable force of law enforcement officers from the Cass County Sheriff's Office, the Meeker County Sheriff's Office, and the BCA converged on the area. They approached the property with tactical precision, their vehicles moving silently down the remote dirt roads. As they neared the cabin, they saw it. Parked partially hidden amongst the trees was the stolen white Chevy Silverado pickup truck. They had found the truck from the Amber Alert. Anderson had to be close. Officers established a secure perimeter around the cabin and the surrounding wooded property. They began a methodical sweep, checking the outbuildings first, their senses on high alert. The main cabin was locked. With caution, they breached the door and began to clear the small structure room by room. At first, it appeared to be empty. The downstairs was clear, the kitchen and living area showing no signs of recent activity. The search moved to the upper level, a small loft area often used for sleeping or storage. As officers ascended the ladder, they found him. Huddled in the dim light of the loft, disheveled and surrounded by the clutter, was Zachary Anderson. He offered no resistance. His desperate flight was over, his chosen sanctuary now, the scene of his capture. He was taken into custody quietly, his demeanor described by officers as subdued and detached. But as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the most urgent question remained unanswered. He was here, alone. Where was Elena? With Zachary Anderson in custody, the atmosphere among the officers was a tense mix of relief and profound anxiety. They had their suspect, but the little girl was still missing. They immediately transported Anderson to the Cass County Sheriff's Office for interrogation, a process that began around 4:30 p.m. The entire focus of the investigation now rested on getting one piece of information from him: Elena's location. Initially, Anderson was evasive and uncooperative. He deflected questions and denied knowing where Elena was, attempting to feign ignorance. Investigators pressed him, knowing that every second that passed was critical. They confronted him with the evidence: the stolen truck, his flight to the cabin, the digital trail that led them directly to him. His weak denials began to crumble under the weight of the undeniable facts. Finally, facing the relentless pressure of the interrogation, Anderson's wall of denial broke. His story shifted. He admitted that Elena was no longer alive. The confession hung in the air, a devastating confirmation of everyone's worst fears. He then provided investigators with a vague description of the location where she could be found. He directed them to a location not far from the cabin, a remote, swampy area, thick with trees and undergrowth. Armed with this horrifying information, a search party was immediately organized. Led by Anderson's grim directions, officers fanned out into the dense woods of Moran Township, a landscape of tangled brush and wetlands. They combed the area, their hope replaced with a somber determination. The search didn't last long.
We have an update now to the Amber Alert we told you about at the top of our newscast, not to give you. The Meeker County Sheriff's Office says that the body of 5-year-old Elena Ertl Anderson has been arrested. The little girl's family said that Anderson was staying with them last night at their home in Watkins, Minnesota. We're missing this morning. We do have a reporter in Meeker County right now. We're continuing to get new information about this investigation.
Following his grim directions, they searched a swampy section of the woods, tucked away from any trail or path. There, they found her. A crude attempt had been made to conceal her location with fallen branches and brush. It was a scene of profound tragedy, the final heartbreaking destination of a search that had captivated and horrified an entire state. It was a scene of profound tragedy, the final heartbreaking destination of a search that had captivated and horrified an entire state. The race against time was over, and it had ended in the most devastating way imaginable. The discovery of Elena marked the tragic end of the search, but it was the beginning of the next critical phase, determining the circumstances of her death. She was carefully recovered from the remote wooded area and transported for forensic examination. This examination would provide the irrefutable evidence needed to understand what had happened in her final hours. The results of the medical examination were heartbreaking. The examiner determined that Elena's death was the result of a deliberate and brutal act, confirming the tragic nature of the crime. The findings indicated a clear intent to cause harm, revealing the severity of the encounter. Furthermore, the examination revealed she had sustained other serious injuries, which pointed to a physical struggle that a child could not have withstood. But the examination revealed additional, crucial details. The medical examiner found unequivocal physical evidence that established the motive for the crime. This discovery answered the main question investigators had been asking. It became clear that the abduction was committed in the course of another very serious felony. Armed with this definitive evidence, prosecutors now had a complete picture of his actions and could pursue the most severe charges possible under the law. With the irrefutable evidence from the autopsy and his own confession, the legal path for Zachary Anderson was short and absolute. He was charged with first-degree murder in connection with other serious felonies, one of the most severe offenses under Minnesota law. The premeditated and brutal nature of his crimes left little room for legal maneuvering. The entire state, which had collectively held its breath during the Amber Alert, now waited for justice. Facing an overwhelming case built by investigators and the undeniable forensic evidence, Anderson and his legal counsel made a pivotal decision. Rather than proceeding to a jury trial, a process that would have forced the Ertl family to relive every horrific detail of Elena's final days in a public courtroom, Anderson chose to plead guilty. On July 17, 2017, nearly a year after the crime, he stood before a judge in Meeker County District Court and formally admitted his guilt. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, sparing the family the agony of a trial. The sentencing hearing was held shortly thereafter. It was a somber and emotionally charged proceeding. The courtroom was a space for the Ertl family to finally confront the man who had shattered their world. Elena's parents, Matt and Kayla, delivered powerful and heartbreaking victim impact statements. They spoke of a vibrant, happy little girl who loved to laugh and whose future was stolen by a man they had welcomed into their home as a friend. They described the unending pain and the gaping hole left in their lives, a void that could never be filled. Their words painted a vivid portrait, not of a victim, but of the bright light that had been extinguished. After hearing their statements, the judge delivered the sentence. There was no leniency, no possibility of a future outside of prison walls for Zachary Anderson. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was the maximum sentence allowed, a declaration that his actions were so heinous he had forfeited his right to ever walk free again. For his crimes against Elena Ertl, a life sentence meant just that, a life for a life, ensuring the man who stole a little girl's future would spend the rest of his own days behind bars.
Nearly 2 months later, a memorial continues to grow outside their Watkins home. the home to a family sorely missing its youngest member.
She was very loving.
Elena was known for her friendliness and versatile personality, from her love of My Little Ponies to the time she spent hunting with her dad.
She'd come in our room every morning and give us a kiss good morning and, made sure everybody else was okay.
Kayla and Matt Ertl hold memories and many tokens close as they try not to concentrate on the evil that took Elena away.
She's an innocent little girl that did nothing wrong.
Matt had worked with Zach Anderson at a utility line company for 4 years. Anderson lived in Coon Rapids, so when they'd play softball in the summer, he'd sleep over. On that Saturday morning in August, the family woke up to find Anderson and Elena missing, along with Matt's pickup. 3 hours after an Amber Alert was issued, canine officers found Anderson near his family's cabin by Motley. Elena's body was found nearby. Investigators say she'd been before Anderson killed her.
People that you think that you know, and that you trust, and become your friend, and you have in your home, and turn your back on you, and you don't understand it.
The Ertls admit they will struggle trusting new friends moving forward. Still, they are continuously reminded of the good that remains.
The support has been overwhelming.
Yeah.
Gifts and cards from so many touched by Elena's life.
This one, too, was a journal or a day-by-day.
Even strangers from states away pledging to be more patient parents and not taking the time they have with their own kids for granted.
He'll make comments of certain shows or different things he did that made her laugh.
The Ertls are pushing on for their son, Carter, and for their small community that created a public space to heal.
Look outside and there'd be 4 or 5 kids just sitting there reading books, and it's cool to see.
It's where they find comfort in the words they are certain Elena would want them to hear. When it rains, watch for rainbows. When it's dark, watch for stars. Liz Collin, WCCO 4 News.
Long after the courtroom fell silent and the legal chapters closed, the true story of Elena Ertl continues. It is a story not found in case files or headlines, but in the quiet, loving memory of a little girl whose light was unforgettable. Elena was a whirlwind of joy. Those who loved her speak not of a victim, but of a 5-year-old spitfire with an infectious laugh and sandy hair that was always a little messy from playing. She was the boundless energy of a happy childhood, a little girl with a big, bright personality who was just beginning to explore the wonders of the world. She was a cherished daughter and a beloved friend, a small person who left an immeasurably large space in the hearts of those she touched. While a deep shadow was cast on a summer day in 2016, that darkness cannot extinguish the memory of her spirit. To focus on the end is to miss the beauty of the life she lived. Her legacy is not the sorrow of her absence, but the love she inspired. It lives on in her family's hearts, in the shared stories of her funny antics, and in the quiet strength of a community that came together in her name. She is the song that ended too soon, but whose melody lingers for all who were lucky enough to hear it. Elena Ertl is remembered not for how she was lost, but for how she lived, with laughter, with spirit, and with a light that continues to shine in the memories of all who loved her.
A sparky girl who was full of life, but you took that life from her. All that lay ahead of her, a career, loves, and family of her own, will now never be.
So what can you tell me about the murder of Tia Sharp, Stuart?
And that was it, and then the door closed and she walks out. I don't take precise times and things like that, but when she walked out that door, I know damn well it was 12:10. I called into my clock, because as I was hoovering up the dog's mess by my kitchen, I look up and I've got a great big clock in front of me on the cooker that says 12:10.
For the residents of New Addington, a sprawling housing estate in the southern reaches of London, the summer of 2012 had been unremarkable. It was a place of close-knit streets and familiar faces, where the lives of families were deeply intertwined. For 12-year-old Tia Sharp, it was simply home to the person she adored most, her grandmother, Christine Bicknell. Tia was a frequent and welcome visitor at 20 The Lindens, the modest terraced house Christine shared with her partner, Stuart Hazel. These visits were a cherished routine, a constant in Tia's young life. Tia was on the cusp of adolescence, a girl described by all who knew her as bubbly, bright, and full of life. She loved her phone, her friends, and the familiar comfort of her family. Her bond with Christine was particularly strong. Tia looked up to her grandmother, and the time they spent together was precious. So, when Tia prepared to stay over on Thursday, August 20, there was no sense of foreboding, no hint of the darkness that was about to descend. It was just another sleepover at Nan's house. Her mother, Natalie Sharp, had dropped her off. The plan was simple and familiar. A night at Christine's, perhaps a trip out the next day. The house on the Lindens was a typical family home, filled with the everyday clutter of life. Christine had gone out for the evening to work a night shift, leaving Tia in the care of Hazel, a man who had been part of the family for years. To Tia, he was just her Nan's boyfriend, a familiar figure in the household. That night, according to Hazel's later account, was entirely ordinary. He claimed they stayed up late, playing video games and watching television, before Tia eventually went to sleep in her usual spot, the spare bedroom. As the sun rose on Friday, August 3rd, the house was quiet. Christine had not yet returned from her shift. The day stretched ahead, full of the promise of a typical summer Friday. According to the only story the world would hear for a week, Tia woke up, got dressed, and by midday was ready to head out. She had plans, Hazel would say, to meet friends and travel to the Whitgift shopping center in nearby Croydon to buy new flip-flops. He would claim he gave her £10 for her bus fare and watched her walk out the door, a slight figure in her yellow top, disappearing down the path of the Lindens, ready for a day of teenage freedom. It was the last time, he insisted, anyone would ever see her alive. The first hint that something was wrong came not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, creeping dread. Hours after Tia had supposedly left for the shopping center, calls to her mobile phone went straight to voicemail. This was unusual. Tia, like most girls her age, was rarely separated from her phone. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to dip lower, a knot of anxiety tightened in her mother Natalie's stomach. Tia was meant to be home by 6 p.m. When that time came and went with no word, worry turned to outright panic. Frantic calls were made between family members. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. By 9 p.m., the family could wait no longer. They reported Tia missing to the police. The official version of events, the one that would shape the first critical days of the search, came from Stuart Hazel. He calmly told Natalie, and later the police, a simple and plausible story. Tia had left the house at around noon, he said. She was heading to Croydon to buy shoes. He claimed to have walked her to the end of the road, giving her bus money and watching as she headed towards the tram stop. He even mentioned her last words to him, a casual goodbye. It was a neat, tidy narrative that left no immediate room for suspicion. She was just a 12-year-old girl who had missed her curfew. But for Natalie Sharp, the story felt wrong. Her daughter was sensible and responsible. She would have called. The police, however, initially treated it as a standard missing teenager case. They took Hazel's statement at face value. Why wouldn't they? He was her grandmother's long-term partner, a man who was, for all intents and purposes, family. The initial investigation focused on the outside world on the route to the tram stop, the shopping center, and the friends Tia might have met. The family, however, refused to be calm. Driven by a primal fear, they launched their own search. Natalie, her face etched with a desperate terror that would soon become familiar to the entire nation, began pacing the streets of New Addington, calling her daughter's name into the darkness. She and her partner, David Niles, printed homemade missing posters with Tia's smiling face and plastered them on every lamppost, shop window, and bus stop they could find. The local community, seeing the family's raw anguish, began to stir. Friends and neighbors joined the search, their flashlights cutting through the late-night gloom. But as the hours bled into the next day, every street checked and every call unanswered only deepened the mystery. Tia Sharp had, it seemed, simply vanished into thin air. In the glare of the media lights that descended on New Addington, Stuart Hazel stepped into the role of the concerned family member with unnerving ease. While Tia's mother Natalie was visibly distraught, often unable to speak through her tears, Hazel became the family's unlikely spokesperson.
Tell me a little bit about Tia's life. I mean, is she a happy girl? Is she jolly? Has she got any problems?
No, she's got no problems at all. She's a happy-go-lucky golden angel. You know what I mean? She's perfect. There's no arguments, no nothing we can think of. Absolutely nothing.
So Tia stays here Thursday night, just with you. Christine's working. Talk me through Friday up until the last time you see her. Tell me exactly what you did.
Tia's come down the stairs around about 10:30, 11, something like that maybe. Because I know she was on about going up to Croydon for about, she wanted to get up early. She picked up your mum's DS up, played the DS for a little while. I said, well, we're going to have some breakfast. So I made her some toast, and she had the toast, and then she wanted a sausage roll, because she's always eating sausage rolls. Basically, then she was sitting there. She doesn't take her washing up out, so I took her washing up out. Just started doing a little bit of washing up in the kitchen. She was in there. She was telling me what she was doing, but I weren't really logging it into my head. I didn't. Do you know what I mean? Remember, like the kids, they talk to you. It goes in one ear, stays there for a second, and it goes out. You know what I mean? As I was hoovering, then she walked out. She walked past me from the front room to go out, and she walked out the front door. That is all I know. And she left her phone on charge, because I told her to sit there and leave her phone on charge. I didn't mean leave it on charge, because what Tia doing, she plays on the BB thing, but then she uses it as it's charging, so there's no charge going through to it. So when I said to her, just leave your phone on charge, it means leave her phone on charge, not use it, let it charge up a bit, then you can actually take it with you or whatever, because she's been responsible to go to Croydon before. She's been responsible to go on trains and buses and trams and everything before on her own.
So when she walked past you and out to the door, did she say anything?
She said, goodbye. Well, I said, well, make sure you're back at 6. She went, yeah. And that was it, and then the door closed and she walks out. I don't take precise times and things like that, but when she walked out that door, I know damn well it was 12:10, according to my clock, because as I was hoovering up the dog's mess by my kitchen, I look up and I've got a great big clock in front of me on the cooker, which says 12:10.
Now listen, you've been living in house arrest,
basically,
almost, for the last 7 days almost now. How's that been?
Oh, it's been horrible. It's been horrible. Do you know what I mean? The family's, we're stuck inside here, do you know what I mean? We've got all the papers outside, all putting accusations down, and they asked me stupid questions yesterday, like, oh, did you do anything? I said, well, no, I didn't. Excuse my language, but no, I didn't. I'd never think of that. I'd loved her to bits. She's like my own daughter, for God's sake. We had that sort of relationship. It was that sort of thing. It was just, you know, she wanted it, she got it. She's got a loving home. She's never gone without anything, so I can't work it out. What the hell's going on? We're all out there. They want to report the truth.
So, do you feel under pressure? Do you feel that perhaps the people are looking at you?
Well, if they believe what they read in the papers, they can do whatever they like. Because I know deep down in my heart that Tia walked out of my house. She walked out there, and I know damn well, because she was seen walking down the pathway. I know she made that track down to that way. What happened after that is I don't know.
He painted a picture of a normal, affectionate relationship, positioning himself as a protective figure, a step, grandfather caught in a living nightmare. This performance was chillingly effective. To the millions watching at home, he appeared to be just another member of a heartbroken family, desperate for answers. He seemed to be one of them, a pillar of support for Tia's distraught grandmother, Christine, who clung to his arm during press conferences. His deception went beyond interviews. Hazel threw himself into the public search efforts with conspicuous enthusiasm. He joined the local volunteers, wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with Tia's face, and tramped through the same woods and parks as everyone else. He gave advice, pointed out areas to search, and spoke with other volunteers about his hopes for her safe return. This active participation was a masterstroke of manipulation. It deflected any possible suspicion and reinforced his image as a man doing everything in his power to find the little girl he claimed to love. He was hiding in plain sight, his grief, a performance so convincing that it fooled an entire community, the police, and a national television audience. Looking back, there were subtle, jarring notes in his behavior. Some observers noted he seemed almost too calm, too composed for a person whose loved one was missing. In one interview, He casually described the police search of the house, remarking, "They've turned my house upside down." There was no anger, no frustration in his tone, just a flat, detached observation. While Natalie's pleas were raw with emotion, Hazel's were articulate and measured, as if rehearsed. But at the time, these were just fleeting impressions, easily dismissed amidst the chaos and hope of the search. He was, after all, the last person to see her. His story was the foundation of the entire investigation, and for 7 agonizing days, almost no one thought to question the storyteller. The quiet anxiety of the first night quickly erupted into a full-scale mobilization. The search for Tia Sharp was no longer confined to her frantic family. It became the single, unifying mission of the entire New Addington community. A ripple of concern became a tidal wave of action. Neighbors who barely knew each other now stood side by side, united by a common purpose. An army of ordinary people, parents, shopkeepers, teenagers fanned out across the estate, their determination a powerful testament to the community's spirit. This grassroots effort was soon matched by a massive police operation. More than 80 officers were assigned to the case, and the area was swarmed with a sea of high-visibility jackets.
The family want Tia home. They miss her dreadfully, and I wanted to assure you of all the work the Met is doing, and we are doing everything we can, everything we possibly can to find her and trying to support the family at this time. Let me give you a sense of the scale of the inquiry at present. I have had Olympic resources redirected to help in the search for Tia, and over the last 3 days or so, that has meant more than 100 extra uniform officers in the Croydon and Mitcham areas. There are over 80 officers working on this case, 40 of them detectives, 40 of them specialist search officers. We've collected more than 800 hours so far of CCTV footage from buses, from trams, and we've viewed more than 120 hours of that CCTV in live time, and that continues round the clock. I would also like to thank everybody in the Croydon and Mitcham communities that has helped with the investigation so far. I spent time with councillors and with members of the Pathfinders charity on the New Addington estate yesterday evening. I was completely moved by their generosity, their energy and commitment. We were stopped many times on the way to and from by people handing out leaflets showing Tia, and to everyone who is doing that, I wanted to say thank you, and please continue to look for her. Can I once again thank every member of the public who has phoned into the incident room. The Met's priority at this time is to find Tia safe and well.
Specialist search teams, accompanied by sniffer dogs, were deployed. The green expanse of Furze Wood, a large patch of woodland bordering the estate, became the focal point of their efforts. For days, officers meticulously combed through the dense undergrowth, searching for any sign, any clue, a dropped item, a scrap of clothing that might lead them to Tia. The whir of a police helicopter overhead became a constant, almost hopeful sound above the houses of the Lindens. Simultaneously, the Find Tia campaign exploded. Her smiling face, frozen in a school photograph, was taped to every surface. It looked out from shop windows, bus shelters, and car dashboards. Yellow ribbons, a symbol of hope for the safe return of a missing person, began to appear, tied to railings and trees throughout the estate. The media coverage was relentless. Tia's story led the national news bulletins every night. Her mother, Natalie's tearful pleas, and her estranged father, Stephen Carter's emotional appeal for his little girl to come home, were broadcast to millions. The nation was captivated and united in hope. Donations poured in to support the search. Strangers traveled to New Addington to join the volunteer lines. For a week, it felt as though the entire country was holding its breath, collectively willing Tia to be found safe. The dominant theory, the one everyone clung to, was that she had been abducted by a stranger. It was a terrifying thought, but one that allowed for the possibility of a rescue, of a happy ending. No one, not the police, not the public, and not her desperate family searching the woods, considered the possibility that the answer to her disappearance lay just feet away from where the entire search was being coordinated. They were all looking in the wrong place. Number 20. The Lindens had become the unlikely heart of the search for Tia Sharp. It was where her grandmother Christine waited, where family gathered to console one another, and where news crews aimed their cameras, hoping for an update. The small, terraced house was the central hub of a community's hope. It was also a crime scene, hiding its terrible secret in plain sight. The police, of course, had been inside. Not once, but 4 separate times in the week following Tia's disappearance. The first visit, on Saturday, August 4th, was little more than a cursory check. Officers walked through the house, but their focus was on corroborating Stuart Hazel's story. They were searching for clues about where Tia might have gone, not where she might be. The house was cluttered and messy, and nothing immediately seemed out of place. Hazel, the calm and cooperative witness, controlled the environment, guiding them through the rooms of the home he had meticulously tidied. A second search was conducted the next day. Again, it was not a full forensic examination. The mindset of the investigation was still fixed on an external abduction. The police were operating under the assumption that the family were victims, not suspects. As the week progressed, however, a strange, persistent odor began to permeate the house. Family members who visited noticed it, describing it as a deeply unsettling smell. They mentioned it to Hazel. He had an answer for that too. He claimed he had cooked a big roast dinner days before and had left a bag of spoiled meat in the loft, promising to clear it out. It was a plausible, if unpleasant, explanation that was readily accepted. Even a third search by a specialist dog team failed to raise the alarm. The prevailing belief was that Tia was alive, and the efforts were concentrated on the world outside the front door. The house on the Lindens was treated as a sterile base of operations, not a place of suspicion. Officers came and went, taking statements and offering support, all while the evidence they so desperately sought lay just a few feet above their heads. The attic, accessible only through a small hatch in the ceiling, was cramped and packed with the accumulated junk of years. It was an afterthought. No one had a reason to perform the difficult task of climbing up and sifting through the debris. For 7 days, the house was a paradox, the place where their missing child was hidden. While hundreds of people searched the nearby woods with desperate hope, the truth of her fate lay hidden in the darkness of the loft. By Thursday, August 9th, the veneer of normalcy inside 20 The Lindens was beginning to crack. For a week, Christine Bicknell had clung to the hope that her granddaughter was alive, and to the man who promised he was doing everything to find her. But hope was being suffocated by a creeping unease. The unpleasant smell in the house was getting worse, becoming overwhelming that Hazel's story about spoiled meat could no longer explain away. It clung to the furniture, the curtains, and the air itself. Christine watched her partner. She saw the man who performed for the cameras, the concerned step-grandfather. But in the quiet moments, away from the public gaze, she saw something else. She saw a calmness that felt unnatural, a detachment that bordered on cold. His story, once so plausible, now felt flimsy. The details he offered seemed too polished, too rehearsed. The lie, held together by sheer audacity, was starting to fray at the edges. A grandmother's intuition, a primal instinct that something was terribly wrong within her own home, began to overpower her loyalty to her partner. The breaking point came. The exact conversation is lost to the privacy of that house. But the outcome was decisive. Overcome with a dreadful suspicion she could no longer ignore, Christine Bicknell picked up the phone and called the police. She told them she didn't believe Hazel's story anymore. She told them about the smell. Her call transformed the house from a base of operations into the primary focus of the investigation. On Friday, August 10th, exactly 1 week after Tia was last seen, police officers returned to the Lindens. This time, their approach was different. The sympathetic support was gone, replaced by a grim, methodical determination. They were no longer searching for clues about where Tia had gone. They were searching the house itself, top to bottom, with the assumption that they had been deceived. The team was led by a detective who, frustrated by the lack of progress and stung by the possibility of a catastrophic police error, was determined to get a definitive answer. They would not leave until every inch of the property had been examined. The search began, methodical and slow, moving through the now familiar rooms. But this time, all eyes were drawn upwards, towards the small, unassuming hatch in the landing ceiling that led to the loft. The atmosphere inside 20 The Lindens had transformed. The chaotic, hopeful energy of the past week had evaporated, replaced by a heavy clinical silence. Family members were escorted from the property, their anxious questions met with grim, non-committal answers. The house was now sealed, a sterile zone, under the complete control of the police. Their focus was singular, their purpose unwavering, and it was directed at the ceiling of the first-floor landing. An officer placed a ladder beneath the loft hatch. With each step he climbed, the strong, unpleasant smell intensified, confirming their worst fears. This was not the smell of forgotten food. Pushing open the hatch, the officer was met by a wall of stale, hot air and darkness. He pulled himself up into the cramped, low-ceiling space, his torch beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating a chaotic jumble of old boxes, discarded toys, and forgotten belongings. For a moment, he saw nothing but clutter. Then, his light swept across something that didn't belong. Tucked away in the eaves, partially concealed beneath other items, was a large, bulky object. There was no need for a closer look. The officer knew instantly what he had found. A quiet, terse message was relayed over the police radio. The search for Tia Sharp was over. The words, spoken in the clipped, professional tone of law enforcement, carried a devastating weight that would soon be felt across the country. The search for Tia Sharp was over. Outside, the news spread like a shockwave. The yellow ribbons of hope that adorned the estate suddenly looked like monuments to a terrible, collective delusion. The crowds that had gathered daily to offer support now stood in stunned, horrified silence. Cries of disbelief turned to sobs of anguish. The hope that had united a community and a nation was brutally extinguished in an instant. Tia was not in some stranger's car or a faraway house. She had been in her grandmother's home all along, just feet from where her family wept and prayed. The investigation pivoted with stunning speed. This was no longer a missing person inquiry. It was a homicide. A murder scene was established, and forensic teams in white suits began the grim task of carefully processing the scene in the attic. The house on the Lindens had finally given up its secret. And with that discovery came one immediate, urgent question. Where was Stuart Hazel? The man who had orchestrated the deception, who had stood before them all and lied, had slipped away just before the police arrived for their final, fateful search. He was now the most wanted man in Britain. As forensic specialists began their grim work in the attic of 20 the Lindens, a new, urgent alarm was raised. Stuart Hazel was gone. He had vanished, just as the net was closing in, slipping out of the house and melting into the sprawling suburbs of South London. The man who had performed for the cameras and searched alongside volunteers was now a fugitive and the focus of a frantic, nationwide manhunt. His face, so recently seen on posters pleading for Tia's return, was now broadcast across every news channel, this time with a stark warning. He was wanted for murder. The manhunt, however, was intense but brief. Hazel didn't get far. Later that same day, on the afternoon of Friday, August 10th, he was spotted by members of the public near Mordenhall Park, a leafy oasis in the borough of Merton, miles from the crime scene. A schoolgirl recognized his distinctive, shaven head from the news reports and raised the alarm. Police swarmed the area. They found him walking aimlessly, a man seemingly with nowhere left to run. He was arrested without a struggle, his hands cuffed behind his back. The public performance was over. Stripped of his audience and his lies, he was just a suspect in police custody.
So what can you tell me about the murder of Tia Sharp, Stuart? Stuart?
Oh, a couple of minutes with my solicitor, please.
Okay.
Just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that's no problem. It's 1:10. We'll stop the tapes and we'll leave the room and give you a chance to have a chat.
Faced with the irrefutable truth, he abandoned his denials and offered a new, desperate fiction. He confessed, but it was not a confession to murder. It was a self-serving, pathetic story designed to mitigate his guilt. He claimed Tia's death had been a tragic accident. He told detectives she had suffered a fatal fall down the stairs. In his version of events, he had panicked. Fearing he would be blamed because of his criminal record, he made the stupid decision to conceal her remains in the attic instead of calling for help. He claimed he had intended to give her a proper burial later, once things had calmed down. It was a desperate, cowardly lie, a final attempt to control the narrative. They knew the truth would not be found in his words, but in the forensic evidence they were carefully gathering from the place of concealment he had made in the attic. The trial of Stuart Hazel began in May 2013, at the historic Central Criminal Court, better known as the Old Bailey. As he stood in the dock, Hazel initially maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty to murder. His defense rested entirely on the fragile, self-serving story he had concocted in the interrogation room. That Tia's death was a tragic accident, a fall down the stairs, and that all his subsequent actions were the result of pure panic. It was a narrative designed to paint him as a fool, not a monster. But the prosecution was ready to dismantle it, piece by devastating piece. The Crown's case was overwhelming. The prosecution then turned to Hazel's own behavior, playing his television interviews to the jury. They contrasted the image of the concerned step-grandfather, pleading for Tia's return with the chilling reality that he knew she was already dead, her body hidden just feet above where some of those interviews took place. The prosecutor described his deception as an act of breathtaking cynicism. Then came the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. Evidence so conclusive, it sealed his fate. On Hazel's mobile phone, detectives had discovered evidence on his phone that revealed his true motive. This evidence directly contradicted his story of an accident. This single discovery annihilated any claim of panic. It proved his motive was not fear, but a dark and calculated motive. It showed his actions following her death were not driven by a clumsy attempt to hide an accident, but by a calculated effort to conceal the true nature of his crime. On the 5th day of the trial, just as the jury was about to be presented with this damning evidence, Hazel's defense collapsed. Knowing the profound and damning impact the image would have, he instructed his lawyers to change his plea. In a moment of high drama, Stuart Hazel stood before the court and finally uttered the word, guilty. He admitted to murdering Tia Sharp. The judge, Mr. Justice Nickel, delivered a sentence that reflected the profound horror of the crime. He told Hazel that his late confession was nothing more than a recognition of the overwhelming evidence against him. Labeling his lies to the family and the police as wicked, the judge sentenced Stuart Hazel to life in prison, ordering that he must serve a minimum of 38 years before he could even be considered for parole. Justice, in the eyes of the law, had been served. The man who had deceived a nation was locked away, ensuring he would likely never walk free again. The conviction of Stuart Hazel brought a legal end to the case, but it did not quiet the storm of questions that hung over New Addington. Once the trial was over, a wave of public anger and disbelief crashed down, directed not at the killer, but at the police. The community that had worked tirelessly, searching woods and distributing posters, felt a profound sense of betrayal. They had poured their hearts into finding a little girl who was never actually missing in the way they had been led to believe. She was in the house. How could the police have missed her? 4 times? The question echoed in newspaper headlines and television debates across the country. The story of the dismissed smell, the cursory searches, and the unwavering focus on an external abductor became a case study in procedural failure. In the face of this intense outcry, the Metropolitan Police did something rare and necessary. They publicly apologized. Commander Neil Basu, speaking on behalf of the force, offered a frank admission of their error. He apologized unreservedly for the distress and anguish caused to Tia's family by the delay in finding her body. He explained it as a tragic consequence of human error and an initial assumption that the family were purely victims, which blinded officers to the possibility that the home itself was the crime scene. Tia's case became a grim but vital lesson, forcing a painful reevaluation of police search protocols. The tragedy led to significant changes in how missing person cases, particularly those involving children, are handled. The last known location of a missing person is now treated with a much higher degree of forensic suspicion from the outset. The assumption of family innocence is no longer allowed to preclude an immediate and painstakingly thorough search of the primary property, including every cramped and cluttered loft space. But beyond the headlines, the trial, and the official reviews, there is the memory of Tia herself, a memory her family fights to keep separate from the horror of her death. They remember the bubbly, bright-eyed girl who loved to laugh and spend time at her nan's house. They remember the daughter, granddaughter, and friend, not the victim. The yellow ribbons that once fluttered with desperate hope throughout New Addington eventually came down, but their meaning lingered. They were no longer symbols of a frantic search, but a quiet, heartbreaking tribute to the girl in the attic. A reminder of the community that loved her and the smiling child who had been right there all along. Her name was Jenna Burling. She was 22 years old, a student, an activist, a person who couldn't ignore other people's pain. Have you ever known people like that? People who help others simply because they can't do otherwise? That's what Jenna was like. She studied film and media arts at Temple University, but her real passion was people. She fought for women's rights, helped the homeless in Philadelphia, and was genuinely involved in the life of her city and community. Friends and family knew her as someone who felt things profoundly, a young woman who dedicated her time to causes larger than herself, from advocating for women's rights to volunteering with organizations that served Philadelphia's homeless population. Her empathy was her defining characteristic. It was the lens through which she viewed everything. Also, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? What city are you in? And what's the time and weather like where you are right now? It's always interesting to hear how this story reaches people all over the world. I'm really happy you're here with me. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new stories. The last week of August 2017 was electric, with the promise of a new semester. For Jenna, who had just transferred to Temple's main campus, it was a time of fresh starts and new possibilities. On the evening of Wednesday, August 30th, after a night of socializing with friends and a successful open mic performance, Jenna decided to continue the night. She made her way to Pub Web, a popular, dimly lit tavern on Cecil B. Moore Avenue that was a familiar hub for students. The air inside was thick with the usual mix of cheap beer, loud music, and the excited chatter of a new school year kicking off. It was in this crowded, noisy bar that her path crossed with Joshua Hupperters. At 29, he was several years older than the typical undergraduate crowd. He had been a student at Temple himself, studying marketing, but had since left the university. He was a familiar face in the local bar scene, a man who, on the surface, seemed to blend into the periphery of campus life. As the night wore on and the crowd began to thin, Jenna and Hupperters were seen talking. To any casual observer, it was just another late-night conversation, a common sight in any college bar. By 2 a.m., the bar was closing, and patrons spilled out onto the street. A short time later, at approximately 2:06 a.m., a security camera mounted nearby captured a grainy, silent image that would soon become the cornerstone of a desperate search. The footage showed Jenna Burley walking away from the bar, side by side with Joshua Hupperters, heading down North 16th Street. It was the last time anyone would see her alive. Just a few blocks from the bright lights and lingering noise of Pub Web, the residential buildings on North 16th Street were settling into the pre-dawn quiet. But inside Joshua Hupperters' ground floor apartment, a different, terrifying reality was unfolding. What began as a consensual encounter took a dark and violent turn. According to prosecutors, when Jenna refused to engage in a specific sex act, Hupperters' demeanor shifted from amicable to brutally aggressive. At approximately 4 a.m., the silence of the building was shattered. A neighbor, startled awake, heard sounds so disturbing they couldn't be ignored. There were loud thuds, the crash of things being thrown or knocked over, and then, piercing through the walls, came the unmistakable sound of a woman screaming in terror. The neighbor described it as a series of high-pitched, desperate cries, punctuated by a deeper, male voice. It was a sound of pure panic, a struggle that was violent and prolonged. Fearing the worst, the neighbor did exactly what they were supposed to do. They called 911. They reported the terrifying commotion, the sounds of a violent fight, and the screams coming from the apartment below. The call was dispatched, and soon, Philadelphia police officers arrived at the North 16th Street apartment building. They were now just a few feet away from where Jenna Burley was fighting for her life. But the screams had stopped. The building had fallen silent again. The officers stood outside the apartment, listening. Hearing nothing further, and with no answer at the door, they concluded their investigation and left the scene. They were unaware that behind that closed door, Jenna Burley was dead or dying. The chance to intervene, prompted by a neighbor's fearful call, had passed. The apartment, now a silent tomb, held its grim secret, and the man inside was no longer a host, but a killer faced with the problem of what to do with his victim's body. Thursday, August 31st, dawned with an unnerving silence for the Burley family. Jenna was known for being in constant contact. A text, a quick call. She was reliable. But as the morning turned to afternoon, her phone remained stubbornly quiet. Calls went straight to voicemail, and a growing unease began to creep into the day. Her friends on campus hadn't seen or heard from her either, a strange and unsettling fact for a group that was typically in close communication. For her father, Ed Burley, the silence was particularly sharp. He had just seen his daughter the day before. He'd dropped her off at her sister's house, a routine, happy moment that was now frozen in his memory. As the hours ticked by, his paternal instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a dead phone battery. This was out of character. This wasn't Jenna. By evening, the gnawing worry had morphed into outright fear. The time for waiting and hoping for a simple explanation had passed. Ed Burley made the call that every parent dreads. He contacted the Lower Salford Township Police Department in their hometown to officially report his 22-year-old daughter missing.
Temple University police need your help to track down a missing student. They say 22-year-old Jenna Burley was last seen near the bar Pub Web on the 1500 block of Cecil B. Moore Avenue right around 2 o'clock Thursday morning. If you have any information, please give Temple Police a call.
The report immediately triggered a multi-agency response. Lower Salford Police quickly looped in the Temple University Police Department, as Jenna was last known to be near campus. An official missing person investigation was launched. Her name, her face, and a description of what she was wearing began to circulate. The private, agonizing fear of a family had now become a public, urgent search. While her loved ones prayed for her safe return, investigators began the painstaking work of retracing the final hours of a young woman who had seemingly vanished into thin air. The investigation begins, a trail of digital clues. With Jenna Burley officially registered as a missing person, the investigation began with a pressing urgency. Detectives with Temple University Police started where her trail went cold. Pub Web. In modern policing, the first witnesses are often silent, electronic eyes. Investigators began the methodical process of collecting and scrutinizing hours of surveillance footage from the bar and surrounding businesses, looking for any digital breadcrumbs that could point them in the right direction. It didn't take long to find her. On a camera positioned with a clear view of the street, they saw the image that confirmed her family's worst fears. There was Jenna at 2:06 a.m., walking away from the bar's entrance. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man they would soon identify as 29-year-old Joshua Hupperters. He was now their primary person of interest, the last known individual to have been with Jenna. Armed with his identity and address, investigators made their way to his apartment on North 16th Street, the very same apartment where a neighbor had reported terrifying screams just hours earlier. When they arrived, they found Hupperters at home. By this point, he had already spent hours trying to erase the evidence of his horrific crime. He had frantically used cleaning supplies to wipe away bloodstains and had attempted to mask the lingering odor of bleach. When questioned, Hupperters was evasive. He told the officers that he had been so drunk he couldn't remember who he had left the bar with, claiming to have woken up alone. His story was a transparent lie, but without probable cause to enter his home, the officers' hands were tied. However, they saw enough to deepen their suspicions. As they spoke to him, they could see what appeared to be scratches on his face and neck, and they noticed he had a cut on his hand. Hupperters left the conversation and returned with bandages on his hand, a clumsy attempt at concealment that only heightened the investigators' interest. They may have left his doorstep that day without making an arrest, but they now had a prime suspect and a location of intense focus. Joshua Hupperters was no longer just a person of interest. He was the center of their investigation. The brief encounter with police on his doorstep had sent Joshua Hupperters into a state of heightened panic. He knew the investigators were suspicious, and it was only a matter of time before they returned with a warrant. The scratches on his neck were a damning physical record of Jenna's final struggle, and the apartment, despite his frantic cleaning efforts, was still a compromised crime scene. His primary objective became singular and urgent. He had to get Jenna's body out of the apartment. Hupperters went to a nearby store and purchased a large blue plastic storage bin. Back in his apartment, he forced Jenna's body inside, contorting her into the cramped container. The bin was now impossibly heavy, a dead weight he could not move on his own. He needed help, and he turned to his own family for it. He called his cousin, 28-year-old Eric Carlson, and fed him a fabricated story. He claimed he was being evicted and needed immediate help moving his belongings out of the apartment. When Carlson arrived, Hupperterz was ready. He pointed to the large blue bin, explaining that it was full of clothes and personal items. Together, the two men struggled with the immense weight of the container, loading it into a vehicle. Carlson, completely unaware of the horrifying truth of what he was handling, was simply doing a favor for a family member he thought was in a bind. Their destination was not a storage unit, but the suburban quiet of Jenkintown, just outside Philadelphia. There, they unloaded the bin and placed it inside the garage of Hupperterz's mother's home. For the moment, the primary piece of evidence was hidden, miles away from the North 16th Street apartment that police were now closing in on. But Hupperterz knew this was only a temporary solution. He had successfully moved the problem, but he had also widened the circle of his crime, leaving a trail that stretched from the city to the suburbs, with his own mother's home now entangled in his desperate and calculated cover-up. The garage in Jenkintown offered only a brief respite for Joshua Hupperterz. He knew it was a dangerously temporary hiding place. His mother could discover the bin at any moment, and the police investigation was intensifying with each passing hour. In the panicked calculus of a murderer trying to outrun his crime, he decided he needed more distance, a place far more remote where his secret could be buried for good. His mind settled on a familiar location, his grandmother's property in Paupack Township, a secluded spot nestled deep in the Poconos of Wayne County, over 100 miles away. In what would become one of the most chilling and audacious details of the case, Hupperterz summoned a ride-sharing service to transport his grisly cargo. A Lyft driver arrived, an unwitting accomplice in the final leg of a horrifying journey.
New details tonight in the murder of Temple student Jenna Burley. Officials have confirmed she was beaten and strangled to death. And we've also learned that the suspect may have used a popular ride-share service to move her body. Sunday night, Sarah's off on Walter Perez. The big story in Action News is disturbing new information in the murder of 22-year-old Jenna Burley. The case continues to unfold, and there are still lingering questions about details involving her murder. But tonight, we know more about how she died and what her accused killer may have done to cover up his actions. Action News reporter Annie McCormick is live at police headquarters with details. Annie.
And Walter, the suspect is charged with murder and is in jail. New details continue to emerge in this complex investigation. Just this weekend, Police Commissioner Ross saying that they're still looking in to see if other people were involved. 29-year-old Joshua Hupperterz charged with murder by Philadelphia police Sunday morning in the death of 22-year-old Temple student Jenna Burley. Investigators discovered Burley's body Saturday afternoon on Hupperterz's grandmother's property in Paupack Township, Wayne County, outside Scranton, after state police located and arrested the 29-year-old there Friday afternoon. This morning, the Wayne County coroner announced Burley died from blunt trauma and strangulation. Police believe Hupperterz, a former Temple student, killed the victim at his off-campus apartment in the 1700 block of North 16th Street. Sources say his roommate told police he came home to find cleaning products and it appeared someone tried to clean up blood.
We still have a lot of work to do, to include trying to figure out who else may have been involved.
Police executed a search warrant at Hupperterz's apartment with a cadaver dog. The video shows the same investigators searching this residence in the 800 block of Cloverly Lane in Jenkintown. Police sources say Hupperterz transported Burley's body from Philadelphia to Jenkintown, then Wayne County. He allegedly used a vehicle operated by popular ride-sharing app Lyft for a portion or all of the trip. Only Action News was there when investigators processed a vehicle with a Lyft sticker late Saturday afternoon at police headquarters. Lyft tonight released a statement saying the allegations are devastating. We stand ready to work with the authorities in their investigation. Burley's family reported her missing Thursday after she stopped communication and missed class. This is one of the last images of Burley taken just after 2 a.m. Thursday at Pub Web, an off-campus bar near Hupperterz's apartment. Police have video of the two and believe it's the first time they met. Burley had just started at Temple, a longtime neighbor of the Harleysville native, says she was always looking out for others.
She was a great person, always happy, always energetic. She would advocate for absolutely any cause, LGBT, anything you could think of. She was all about equality.
And the suspect faces even more charges than murder, including abuse of a corpse and also drug offenses after a large amount of drugs and cash were reportedly found inside of his apartment during the search. Court records also show he has a lengthy rap sheet in other areas of the state, ranging from a DUI to burglary. For now, reporting live in front of police headquarters, Annie McCormick, Channel 6 Action News. Walter, back to you.
Such a tragic story. Thank you, Annie.
Hooperturds loaded the heavy blue storage bin into the car, and for the next 2 hours, the driver transported a murderer and his victim across the state of Pennsylvania, completely unaware of the crime that was sealed in the plastic container just feet away. Upon arriving at the rural property, Hupperturds moved the bin into a small, nondescript shed. In the quiet solitude of the Poconos, surrounded by woods, he must have felt a flicker of relief. He had moved the evidence from his apartment, out of his mother's garage, and to a place where he believed no one would ever think to look. He had covered his tracks. But he had underestimated the investigators. As they pieced together his movements and interviewed those he had contacted, the trail inevitably led them north. Acting on information that pointed them toward the family property, Pennsylvania State Police were dispatched to Wayne County. On Saturday, September 2nd, 2 days after Jenna was murdered, troopers arrived at the quiet Powpack home. They began to search the grounds. It wasn't long before they approached the shed. Inside, they found it, the large blue storage bin. When they lifted the lid, the desperate search for Jenna Burley came to its tragic and horrifying end. Her body, wrapped in a sheet, was inside. The cover-up was over.
Breaking tonight at 6, police in Philadelphia are trying to determine what happened to Jenna Burley, a Temple student missing since Thursday and now feared dead. Good evening, I'm Joe Holden. Natasha Brown is off tonight. Now, the investigation of missing Temple University student Jenna Burley has intensified. Police tell us they have discovered human remains in Honesdale, Wayne County, though they have not confirmed that the remains belong to Burley. However, here is the breaking development. Burley's father wrote in a Facebook post just moments ago that his daughter is, quote, in heaven. Eyewitness News reporter Cleve Bryant spoke with Jenna's father, who confirmed that she is dead. Cleve is live in North Philadelphia with the latest on this breaking story. Cleve, good evening.
Good evening, Joe. I talked to the father this morning just very, very briefly. We touched base later this afternoon after that post, and he did confirm to me what was in that post, saying that his daughter has passed away. Now, we are waiting for confirmation from Philadelphia police. They say they may have a press conference this evening where they'll be able to give us many more details. Meanwhile, we've been at this scene all day here on North 16th Street, where they were looking for some clues. It's been a very busy day for police here.
Removing evidence from an off-campus apartment and sorting through trash on the curb, Philadelphia police are keyed in on the 1700 block of North 16th Street in North Philly, looking for clues in the disappearance of 22-year-old Temple student Jenna Burley.
I'm just, a little scared, only because I'm like right next door. I'm scared. It could have probably been me, you never know.
Naomi Molina lives in the third-floor apartment in building 1708. She says officers were in and out of the first-floor apartment.
I left yesterday, and the cops and detectives were downstairs.
Police say they're questioning the man who lives there, who's friends with Burley. On and near campus, Burley's disappearance has been the main topic of conversation since her sister Janelle posted a plea for help to find Jenna. She says the last time anyone saw her sister was when she left Pub Web around 2 a.m. on Thursday. Late Saturday afternoon, Ed Burley announced his daughter Jenna's death on Facebook and confirmed her passing to me on the phone.
Our prayers go out to her and to her family.
Again, this is a very active investigation. We're trying to find out what connections there are between this scene and what state police found out in the central part of the state. And again, hoping to get some more information from Philadelphia police tonight. They say that they may do a press conference shortly. Live in North Philly, Cleve Bryant, CBS 3.
With the discovery of Jenna's body in the Powpack shed, the investigation snapped into its final phase. The search was over. Joshua Hupperters was swiftly taken into custody, his desperate cross-state effort to hide his crime having crumbled around him. Faced with the undeniable evidence that authorities had found his victim, his strategy shifted from evasion to damage control. He was cornered, and complete denial was no longer an option. During questioning, Hupperters made a calculated admission. He confessed to parts of the crime, the parts that were now impossible to deny. He admitted to putting Jenna's body in the storage bin and to transporting it from Philadelphia to his grandmother's property. In legal terms, he confessed to abuse of a corpse and tampering with evidence. He was, in effect, admitting to the ghoulish aftermath. But on the central, most critical charge murder, he was steadfast in his denial. To explain the horrific events, he constructed a new narrative, one designed to deflect all blame for Jenna's death onto another person. He painted a picture of himself not as a killer, but as a terrified bystander who had made a series of panicked, terrible decisions. The true murderer, he claimed, was his roommate, Jack Miley. Hupperters' story was that he had passed out and woken up to find Jenna's body in his apartment, allegedly killed by Miley during a violent dispute. He claimed his only crime was panicking and trying to hide the body to protect his roommate. To investigators and prosecutors, the story was transparently false. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort of a guilty man. There was no evidence tying Jack Miley to the crime. All the evidence pointed directly and exclusively at Hupperters. The surveillance footage of him leaving with Jenna, the screams from his apartment, the fresh scratches on his neck and hands from her final struggle, and his own elaborate multi-stage effort to conceal the body. His attempt to frame his roommate was immediately dismissed by law enforcement as a baseless lie. The battle lines for trial were now clearly drawn. Hupperters had admitted to being the architect of the cover-up, but he had invented a phantom killer for the murder itself. It would be up to a jury to see through the deception. In January 2019, nearly a year and a half after Jenna Burley's death, the trial of Joshua Hupperters began in a Philadelphia courtroom. The case had captured the city's attention, a chilling story of a vibrant young woman's life violently extinguished at the start of a promising new chapter. As the jury was seated, the room settled into a tense silence, ready to hear two profoundly different accounts of what happened inside the North 16th Street apartment. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jason Grinnell, began their opening statement with a clear and brutal narrative. They painted a picture of a night that began consensually, but ended in a fit of savage rage. According to the prosecution, when Jenna refused Hupperters' demand for a specific sexual act, he exploded. What followed was not a simple argument, but a vicious, one-sided assault. They argued that this was not a panic-induced accident, but a conscious act of murder, fueled by rejection and a need for violent control. Then, it was the defense's turn. Attorney David Nenner stood before the jury and offered a completely different reality. He conceded the horrific nature of the crime and the gruesome details of the cover-up, but he insisted his client, Joshua Hupperters, was not the killer. Nenner doubled down on the story Hupperters had concocted since his arrest, that the true murderer was his roommate, Jack Miley. The defense argued that Hupperters had been a passive, perhaps intoxicated bystander who had fallen asleep only to wake up to the nightmare of Jenna's body in his living room. His subsequent actions, hiding the body, lying to police, and embarking on a desperate trip to the Poconos, were framed not as the calculated moves of a killer, but as the panicked, foolish decisions of an innocent man trying to protect his roommate. The jury was now faced with two irreconcilable tales. One was a story of rage and murder, with the defendant at its center. The other was a story of a phantom killer, a narrative that conveniently absolved the defendant of the ultimate crime, while admitting to all the ghoulish acts that followed. As the trial prepared to move into its next phase, the central question was clear. Could the defense create enough doubt to save their client, or would the weight of the forensic evidence tell a story so clear and convincing that no alternate reality could possibly stand? As the trial unfolded, the prosecution began to systematically dismantle the defense's narrative, replacing fiction with a mountain of irrefutable fact. The case against Joshua Hupperters was not built on a single piece of evidence, but on a tightly woven tapestry of forensic science, digital footprints, and damning witness testimony. At the heart of their case was the DNA evidence, which told a silent but powerful story of the final violent moments of Jenna Burley's life. Forensics experts testified that Hupperters's DNA was found on Jenna's body. Even more damning, DNA belonging to Jenna was discovered underneath Hupperters's fingernails. This single piece of evidence was a testament to her struggle. It proved that in her last seconds, she was fighting back, scratching at her attacker and preserving the identity of her killer on his own hands. The scratches that police had observed on his neck and hands were no longer just a point of suspicion. They were now corroborated as wounds from his victim. Next, the medical examiner took the stand, delivering a clinical and chilling account of the sheer brutality of the attack. Dr. Sam Golino testified that Jenna died from a combination of strangulation and blunt force trauma. He detailed how she had suffered more than 30 separate injuries, including a broken hyoid bone in her neck, a classic sign of manual strangulation. The violence was so severe that it was clear this was no accident, but a sustained and deliberate assault. One by one, witnesses took the stand and sealed the holes in the timeline. The roommate Hupperters tried to frame, Jack Miley, testified that he was not even in the apartment at the time of the murder, providing a solid alibi that completely invalidated the defense's core argument. Hupperters's cousin, Eric Carlson, recounted how he was tricked into helping move the impossibly heavy storage bin, believing he was just helping a relative move some belongings. The Lyft driver described the long, strange ride to the Poconos with a man and his sealed container. Finally, the prosecution called Ed Burley to the stand. The courtroom fell quiet as Jenna's father spoke not of forensics or timelines, but of his daughter. He described her kindness, her passion for helping others, and the deep void her absence had left. He recounted their last conversation, a simple, loving exchange that now hung in the air as a painful reminder of everything that was lost. His emotional testimony brought the case back from the cold, hard facts of the crime to the devastating human cost, reminding the jury that the evidence they were weighing was all that was left of a cherished daughter, sister, and friend. After weeks of harrowing testimony and grim evidence, the case was finally in the hands of the jury. They were tasked with seeing through the defense's desperate, baseless attempt to pin the murder on a phantom killer. The weight of the evidence, the DNA, the medical examiner's findings, the testimony of witnesses, and Hupperters's own damning actions was overwhelming. The jury's deliberation was not long. They returned to the courtroom with a verdict that affirmed the prosecution's narrative. Joshua Hupperters was guilty. He was convicted on all counts, including first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. At his sentencing hearing, the judge condemned the crime in the strongest possible terms, calling the murder outrageous and brutal. There would be no leniency. Joshua Hupperters was sentenced to the mandatory term for first-degree murder, life in prison without the possibility of parole. For his other crimes, an additional 4.5 to 9 years were added, a symbolic gesture ensuring he would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. In the wake of the trial, Jenna's family continued their search for accountability. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against PubWeb, arguing that the bar had served both Jenna and Hupperters unreasonable amounts of alcohol that fateful night, contributing to a dangerous situation that ultimately led to her death. But the most powerful response to the hatred that took Jenna's life was not one of anger, but one of profound love. Her family refused to let her story end with an act of violence. To honor the compassionate spirit that had defined her life, they founded a charity called Jenna's Blessing Bags for the Homeless. The initiative was a direct continuation of Jenna's own passion for helping those in need. The bags, filled with essential hygiene products like soap, toothbrushes, and deodorant, are distributed to homeless individuals throughout the Philadelphia area. The project transformed the Burley family's grief into positive action, and the community response was overwhelming. In the years since its creation, the charity has collected and distributed thousands of these bags, providing a small measure of comfort and dignity to those on the streets. Through this simple, powerful act of giving, Jenna Burley's legacy was reclaimed. Joshua Hupperters had tried to erase her, to silence her voice and hide her away in a shed. But he failed. In the end, it is not the darkness of her death that defines her memory, but the enduring light of her kindness, which continues to touch the lives of strangers, carried on by a family determined to ensure their daughter's story would forever be one of love and blessing. First, tears, then lies, and then a landfill 30 kilometers from home. They were looking for the child, but all the clues led to his own mother. She cried on camera, and then they filmed her in a bar, drinking a shot of tequila. At 9:39 a.m. on Wednesday, October 5th, 2022, a 911 operator in Chatham County, Georgia, answered a call that was thick with panic. On the other end of the line was 28-year-old Daniel Youngkin. In the background, his 22-year-old girlfriend, Leilani Simon, could be heard, her voice a frantic counterpoint to his. "I can't find my son," Daniel stammered. "I can't find my boy." Their 20-month-old son, Quentin Simon, was gone. "I woke up and the front door is open and it's white and it's empty," Leilani cried out. She told the operator that the last time her son had been seen was the night before. Now, in the morning light, his pack-and-play was empty and the front door was ajar. To the terrified young couple, the only explanation was a chilling one: an abduction. "They kidnapped," Daniel told the operator, confirming the unthinkable. "I was released from a kidnap." The operator, attempting to get a clear picture amidst the chaos, asked for details. "How old is he?" she asked. The answer underscored the urgency. Quentin was just a baby. "He can't open the door," they insisted. The door had bolts, they explained, yet somehow it was open. They were adamant that there were no signs of a break-in, but the implication was clear. Someone had to have come inside and taken him. The first person Leilani called that morning wasn't 911. It was Daniel, who was already at work. He told his employer he had to leave immediately and rushed home to find Leilani hysterical on the front porch. He was stunned to learn she hadn't yet contacted the authorities. Assuming she had, given the severity of the situation, Daniel was the one who pulled out his phone and made the official report. As officers raced to the address on Buckhalter Road, Daniel tried to provide a description of his missing son. The description was jumbled, a reflection of the frantic state of the household. First, it was blue skin, blue eyes, and white skin. Then, tan skin, dark brown hair, and brown eyes. Finally, Daniel settled on a mix: black, white, Hispanic, and Hawaiian. Quentin was last seen wearing a light blue Sesame Street shirt and black pants. Within 2 minutes, police cars were pulling up to the home. The investigation began immediately, but from the very first moments, inconsistencies started to emerge. Leilani claimed she hadn't seen Quentin since everyone went to sleep the night before, but Daniel told a different story. He said he saw the 1-year-old in his playpen multiple times around 6 a.m. before he left for his warehouse job. According to their timeline, Leilani woke up about 3 hours later, found the door open, and realized the child was missing. Their theory, presented to the arriving officers, was that someone had silently walked through their unlocked front door and abducted the toddler while Leilani slept. The search for little Quentin Simon was underway, but the questions were already piling up. The house on Buckhalter Road was not a simple, quiet home. It was a pressure cooker of familial dysfunction, owned by Leilani's mother, Billie Jo Howell, and her husband, Thomas. Leilani and Daniel Youngkin lived there with Leilani's 3 young children, all from different fathers. They occupied a room downstairs, while upstairs lived Billie Jo, Thomas, and Leilani's older brother, Paul Simon. However, Billie Jo and Thomas were over-the-road workers, often gone for weeks at a time, leaving a volatile mix of personalities to fend for themselves. The environment was anything but stable. Just a month earlier, on September 8th, Billie Jo had filed papers to have Leilani and Daniel evicted from her home. The decision followed a heated argument between mother and daughter over laundry, and arguments so intense that law enforcement had been called, though no charges were filed. The household was tense, not a cohesive unit, but a collection of individuals barely coexisting. Leilani's life was on a downward spiral long before Quentin vanished. She had a history of drug use and a criminal record that included a recent conviction for felony larceny in North Carolina, which had left her on probation. Her mother claimed Leilani had a history of stealing money from her, presumably to buy drugs. This troubled history was the primary reason Leilani no longer had legal custody of her own children. In a move meant to protect the children, the courts had granted custody of Quentin to his grandmother, Billie Jo Howell. Yet despite being the legal non-parent custodian, Billie Jo's own past was checkered with charges for grand larceny, battery, prostitution, and fraud. It was a fragile safety net at best. And because they all lived under the same roof, Leilani's loss of custody was largely a formality. On a day-to-day basis, she was still very much in her son's life, a situation of de facto custody. The financial pressure was also mounting. On September 26th, just 9 days before Quentin disappeared, a court had ordered Leilani to begin paying child support to her own mother for Quentin's care. She had received an eviction notice and was now being told to pay for a child she wasn't legally entrusted with. Her emotional state was just as precarious. A few months prior, she recorded a disturbing 4-minute video while driving, apparently toward a river with the intention of ending her life. In a tearful, rambling message directed at Daniel, she lamented that he didn't love her, that all she wanted was his affection. She said goodbye to her 3 children, Zane, Sky, and Quentin, apologizing for not being able to be there for them.
Left right then. I got here about 3 o'clock yesterday.
And I got here about 3:30 in the morning.
It's been crazy. I mean, we don't know nothing. Whether it's the answers we want to hear or answers we don't want to hear, we just want to know something. My concern is him, and that's all it is. I mean, we concerned with his well-being.
I know everybody worked really hard yesterday, but I want them to keep working hard.
And we appreciate everything that everybody has done, all the people that's come out and searched for him and all that. And he's always smiling. He's a happy kid. I mean, you get some kids but he always had a big smile on his face, and he was always happy.
Let me ask you, why are you getting emotional? Because he's not here. He's just a baby, and I want him home. He's just a baby. Leilani's my daughter. She's 22. She hasn't always done the right things. Sometimes she does really great, and sometimes she doesn't. And I don't know what to think right now. I don't know what to believe, because I don't think anybody ever believes that this is going to happen to them. I don't know if I can trust her or if I don't. I just know I'm hurting, and I want this baby home.
We want answers, and we don't have answers.
Just thank you to everybody that's helped.
Thank you for everybody that's looked for him,
and please don't stop looking.
Yeah, like I said, we want answers. We want to find him. That's the answer we want, is somebody found him. You know, we're still hoping and praying, and we wish everybody to pray for him. Pray for us.
Yes.
The video was a raw, unsettling glimpse into a mind consumed by a need for love and validation, a mindset that seemed to prioritize her turbulent relationship over the well-being of her children. On the day Quentin went missing, Billie Jo Howell was out of town. The child she had been granted custody of to protect him from his mother's instability was, by a twist of fate, left solely in his mother's care. It was during this exact window of time that he disappeared. The report of a missing 20-month-old triggered a massive and immediate response. The Chatham County Police Department, alongside the FBI and K-9 units, descended on the Buckhalter Road neighborhood. They began with a thorough search of the Simon house, looking for the child or any clue that might explain his disappearance. They found stained beds and a stained pack-and-play, but no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Outside, they emptied the family's backyard swimming pool and searched a nearby pond. The area, a diverse mix of suburban homes, woods, and highways, was methodically canvassed and then recanvassed. Buckhalter Road and the surrounding streets were temporarily closed to traffic as the search grew more urgent with every passing minute. The community rallied, with many neighbors joining the frantic early search for the boy. Descriptions of Quentin: light brown hair, brown eyes, last seen in a light blue Sesame Street shirt and black pants, were broadcast to the public. Investigators worked nearly 20-hour days, driven by the desperate hope of finding the toddler alive. Chief Jeff Hadley of the Chatham County Police held a press conference, stating that while everything was on the table, they had no evidence to suggest foul play or to believe Quentin was deceased. The prevailing public theories were that he had either been abducted, as his mother claimed, or had somehow wandered off. But as the days ticked by without a single trace of the boy, suspicion began to ferment within the community and, more quietly, among investigators. The focus started to shift towards the family itself. The public's perception of Leilani, in particular, soured dramatically just a few days into the search. While law enforcement and volunteers scoured the area around the clock, Leilani and her mother, Billie Jo Howell, were spotted at Stingrays, a popular bar on nearby Tybee Island. Witnesses reported that the women were part of a group that spent approximately 3 hours at the restaurant, taking shots and appearing loud and rambunctious. A photo of Leilani at the bar that night quickly surfaced on social media, igniting a firestorm of public outrage.
I've been here every day since this. I am not running and I'm not hiding. And if something does come up that I am at fault, I will take myself to that police station.
Chatham County Police have repeatedly said that though they've named Leilani the prime suspect in her son's disappearance and death, they don't believe she's a flight risk. Leilani says that she and her mother, Billie Howell, spend their days in the backyard of their home because it's too difficult to be inside with reminders of Quentin and the fact that he's gone.
Every day that goes by is less tears and more anger, not knowing what's happening, if that's even understandable. You wake up every day angry, hoping that you're going to get a phone call, and that phone call just doesn't come. We want him back in our arms, holding us. That's what we want. We're just hoping that he's in somebody's house and they're feeding him, and they are hoping that, maybe they wanted a baby or couldn't have a baby. Maybe they thought they were his savior. But it's not. That's their best hopes at this point.
The image of a mother, whose child was the subject of a desperate county-wide search, seemingly having a good time and drinking with friends, was damning. Protesters, furious at her apparent lack of concern, began to gather outside her home, demanding answers and accusing her of being involved in her son's disappearance. They wanted her arrested, even though authorities had not yet named a suspect. The search for Quentin was still officially a missing person case, but for many, it had already become a murder investigation with a prime suspect in plain sight. While the physical search for Quentin yielded nothing, the digital search into Leilani Simon's life was starting to paint a very different picture from the one she presented. Investigators meticulously analyzed her cell phone records and movements from the night of October 4th into the early hours of October 5th. Her story of a frantic mother waking to find her child gone began to unravel with every piece of data they uncovered. Leilani had told police that after a fight with Daniel, she'd left the house late at night to meet a friend named Misty at a nearby gas station to get some Orajel for a toothache. But her phone's location data told a different story. It showed that around 1 a.m., she hadn't gone to a gas station. Instead, she had driven roughly a mile away to the Azalea Mobile Home Park, a location she had failed to mention. Surveillance video from the area confirmed it. Her Dodge Journey was seen parked next to a row of commercial dumpsters. The footage showed her getting out of her vehicle and disposing of something in one of them. When confronted with this evidence, Leilani's story began to shift. Detectives spoke to her supposed friend, Misty, who told them she hadn't seen or heard from Leilani in months. The Orajel alibi was a lie. Cornered, Leilani tried to fit her story into the new facts. She admitted she hadn't met Misty, but insisted she was at the mobile home park for a different reason. She claimed she had gone to meet her drug dealer there, not to buy drugs, but simply to pay off an old debt. As for the dumpsters, she gave a bizarre explanation, claiming she was just throwing away normal household trash. But investigators were not buying it. Why would anyone drive to a secluded trailer park at 1 a.m. just to throw out garbage. The timing and location were too specific, too suspicious. Investigators believed she may have disposed of something related to the case. This discovery was the critical turning point. The evidence from her phone and the surveillance footage was the key that unlocked the direction of the investigation. This revelation also shed new light on a cryptic text message Quinton's babysitter had received at 5:29 a.m. that morning, just hours after Leilani's trip to the dumpsters. The message stated that her services would not be needed that day. It was an odd, last-minute cancellation. To detectives, it now seemed less like a simple change of plans and more like a calculated move by someone who knew the child she was supposed to watch would not be there. Leilani's narrative was crumbling, and with each lie exposed, the focus of the investigation narrowed directly and exclusively on her. On October 12, 2022, exactly 1 week after Quinton Simon was reported missing, the Chatham County Police Department made a grim and pivotal announcement. "We are saddened to report that CCPD and the FBI have notified Quinton Simon's family that we believe he is deceased," a public statement read. "We have named his mother, Leilani Simon, as the prime suspect in his disappearance and death." The news sent a shockwave through the community, extinguishing the flickering hope that Quinton might be found alive. Though no arrest had been made and no charges had yet been filed, the declaration was unequivocal. Leilani was, in the eyes of the law, the sole suspect. With this announcement, the nature of the search shifted dramatically. The frantic canvassing of woods, ponds, and neighborhoods ceased. All resources were redirected to a single, daunting location: the waste management landfill in Savannah County. Based on the evidence they had gathered, Leilani's trip to the dumpsters at the Azalea Mobile Home Park, investigators were convinced of a horrifying sequence of events. Investigators believed Leilani may have disposed of critical evidence related to her son's disappearance in that dumpster, and that the contents of that dumpster had been picked up by a garbage truck and transported to the landfill before anyone knew the child was even missing. The task ahead was monumental. The landfill was a vast mountain of refuse, and the search teams faced the grim prospect of sifting through thousands of tons of compacted garbage. The process was agonizingly slow and meticulous. They knew they were searching for the remains of a very small child, which could be easily missed. Excavators scooped massive loads of trash onto a designated search deck. There, law enforcement officers and sanitation workers painstakingly combed through the debris with rakes, spreading it into thin layers, examining every piece before clearing it to make way for the next load. This grueling work continued day after day, week after week. The physical and emotional toll on the search crews was immense. They moved an estimated 1.2 million pounds of trash, working under the constant, grim awareness of what they were looking for. For over a month, they found nothing. Yet, investigators held firm in their belief that Quinton was there. They refused to give up, driven by the need to recover the little boy and bring a final, tragic resolution to the search. While the crews toiled in the landfill, the public pressure on Leilani intensified, the community's grief and anger coalescing around the mother who was now officially the only person suspected of taking her son's life. On November 18, 2022, after 36 agonizing days of searching, the moment investigators had dreaded and worked tirelessly for finally came. After weeks of searching, investigators finally discovered human remains at the landfill, later confirmed to belong to Quinton. The remains were carefully collected and sent to the FBI's laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, for DNA analysis. The results came back quickly, confirming the search team's worst fears. They belonged to 20-month-old Quinton Simon. The discovery was devastating for everyone involved. Many of the rescue workers who had spent over a month meticulously sifting through trash were profoundly affected, with some later seeking counseling to cope with the trauma of what they had found. Just 3 days later, on November 21st, Leilani Simon was arrested. The woman who had publicly professed her innocence, even telling a local news station she would turn herself in if any evidence proved she was at fault, was taken into custody. She was charged with malice murder, felony murder, concealing the death of another, and making false statements. The search was over, and the case had now officially transitioned from a missing person investigation to a homicide prosecution. With Leilani behind bars, prosecutors began to build their case for trial. They faced a significant challenge. Due to the condition of the remains after being in the landfill for weeks, medical examiners were unable to determine an exact cause of death. They didn't have a murder weapon, a confession, or a direct witness to the crime. Instead, they had a powerful collection of damning circumstances. They had Leilani's web of lies, the fabricated Origel story, the shifting alibis. They had the cell phone and surveillance data that placed her at the dumpsters at 1 a.m. They had the text to the babysitter canceling her services. And they had what they believed was a motive, rooted in Leilani's emotional instability and her desperate need for her boyfriend's attention. The defense, in turn, focused on the lack of direct evidence. They argued that prosecutors couldn't prove a murder had even occurred. It could have been an accident, perhaps a tragic result of the child getting into drugs that were present in the home. They pointed the finger squarely at Daniel Youngkin, highlighting that he was the other adult in the house and that he, too, had changed his story, initially claiming to have seen Quentin that morning before recanting. He was, the defense contended, the embodiment of reasonable doubt. The trial of Leilani Simon began almost 2 years to the day after Quentin's death. Prosecutors laid out their case, painting a portrait of a narcissistic and neglectful mother who saw her own son as an obstacle. The prosecution argued that Leilani treated her son with disregard, acting out of emotional instability and despair. Key testimony came from a 17-year-old babysitter who described a pattern of disturbing behavior.
There was a difference in the love she showed between Zane and Quentin, and I felt bad, and I would work, and my daughter would say, "Can we just get him, Mom, because this happened today?" And I would say, "Yeah, call her and ask her if he can stay."
Can you think of some examples of how the defendant treated the boys differently?
Well, she was working at Bojangles, and she had brought food home, and she fed Quentin loved food, and every time he seen a bag, he would want it. He's little. She would feed Zane before she fed Quentin, every time. And I just thought that was strange.
So do you mean she'd give Zane food and make Quentin wait?
Yes, ma'am,
I mean,
absolutely.
She wasn't physically feeding Zane at that
No,
point.
she would give him the food.
Just give him food.
And he would eat, and then Quentin would be, whining and wanting it, and she would give it to him eventually.
Did you ever say anything to her about that?
I did not.
Are there any other ways that she treated the boys differently that you noticed?
Just by the way she talked to him, when she would, once in a while that she did come and pick them up, she would, grab Zane and he would hug her because he was close to her. I mean, you could definitely tell it. And then, Quentin, 99% of the time, wanted to stay with us, and he would start crying. Now, if Danny come and picked him up, it was different.
How did Quentin act if Danny came?
He would go with Danny. He wouldn't cry to stay with us. He loved Danny. He would, Danny would pick him up and he'd hug him.
Okay. All right. Did Leilani ever talk to you about how she felt about the boys?
Yes, ma'am. She just, one time, and my daughter had more talks with her than I did. I didn't really talk to her that much. But she just said that she loved Quentin more. Zane more than Quentin. And, I didn't question it. She's a crappy mom. I knew that. But I just never said anything to her. I would always call Billy Joe when I seen things that was going on.
Okay. Did she ever, in that conversation, did she explain more about, like, Zane had been through things with her?
Yes,
or anything
that
like
Zane had been her ride or die his whole life. And she did not like Quentin's father.
She told the jury that Leilani treated Quentin differently from her other 2 children, often behaving harshly toward him. One witness described moments of harsh treatment, including an incident where Quentin was left unattended and suffered a fall. The babysitter, a child herself at the time, admitted she never reported the abuse. Another neighbor testified that she always thought Leilani was a lousy mother who seemed more focused on herself than her kids. The prosecution presented the digital note, the tearful video Leilani had recorded months earlier threatening to drive into a river. They argued this video demonstrated her obsessive and unhealthy state of mind, a mindset that prioritized her romantic turmoil over her children's safety. The state contended that nothing had changed in her emotional state between the recording of that video and the night Quinton died. The defense fired back, hammering on the lack of physical evidence. There was no murder weapon. There was no cause of death, her attorney argued. You don't get to assume someone into a murder conviction. They portrayed the state's case as nothing more than rumor, gossip, speculation, and innuendo. They insisted that an accidental death, possibly from a drug overdose, was a plausible alternative that the state couldn't disprove. The defense strategy centered on creating reasonable doubt by pointing to Daniel Youngkin. They reminded the jury that Daniel had initially lied to police, claiming he saw Quinton at 6 a.m. on the morning he vanished. He later admitted this was false, stating he hadn't actually checked the playpen. Why did he lie?
At some point, did y'all get the kids ready for bed and put them down? Or one or both of you?
Yes, sir. I believe so.
Now, from this point forward, did you leave the house again that night at any point?
No.
And did the defendant?
Yes, sir.
What is the first trip that you remember her taking?
To 204.
Did the two of y'all talk about that? Did she say anything to you before she left?
Yeah, she told me she was doing that.
Do you remember what led up to her leaving? Anything about that?
No.
That's fine. Really. And what were you doing at the time that she left for 204?
Laying in bed.
What were the children doing?
Laying down as well.
Where were each of the three children in the house?
Zane was on his race car bed. Sky was on the couch, or in her swing, and Quinton was in his playpen.
At the time that the defendant left for 204, was Quinton okay?
Yeah.
Did anything at all out of the ordinary happen to that point?
No.
And what happened, what was going on while she was gone on that trip to 204?
I think I fell asleep.
Now, do you remember the defendant getting home from the 204 trip?
No.
And why is that?
I was asleep.
What's the next memory you have of that night or morning?
Waking up, and she was beside me, and that was that.
At the time that you went to sleep, was Quinton okay?
Yeah.
Had anything at all happened at that point?
Not to my knowledge.
And let's talk about the night. Do you remember seeing or hearing anything during the night?
No, I don't.
So let's go to you waking up. Did you wake up naturally, or did you wake up in response to an alarm, or what?
Yeah, I think my alarm on my phone went off.
And where did you have your phone that night?
Maybe it was under my pillow. I don't know.
Why would it have been under your pillow?
She had a tendency of going through my things.
What do you mean?
She would, without my knowledge, take my devices and go through them, and I felt it was invasive.
Why was she doing that?
She had this idea that I was wronging her.
How were things between the two of you at this time?
There wasn't much there. I was there for Sky.
So, you think you had an alarm set and your phone might have been under your pillow? Is that kind of where we left off?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you get up, what do you do?
Normally try and be quiet so I don't wake any of the kids up. And I tried to wake her up, but she was normally if I do that, I'd either get yelled at or something like that. So I said, hey, are you going to work today? She'd be like, no. And that's when I proceeded to text Michelle and say that she was going to watch the kids. As in this exhibit here, it says, hey, the kids are going to stay here with her today, Miss Michelle.
And what time was that text sent?
5:20 a.m.
A moment ago, you were talking about what would happen in the morning when you get up for work and you try to wake her up, and you said she would be like.
Oh yeah, she'd yell at me or, yeah, pretty much I'd get yelled at.
By the phrasing, she would be like yelling at you. Can I take from that this is something that this was not the first time this had happened?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you tell us about that? There's a history of this?
It's a pretty general thing at that time.
Tell me what you mean.
I would try and wake her up to go to work, and she would either yell at me for waking her up or say she's not going in, and she would make up the time and go in with Paul on his shift. It'd be a rare occasion for me not to get yelled at or that to happen.
Why was it during that time frame that you were able to get up and go to work as scheduled, and she would have these difficulties with that? What was going on?
I'm sorry, could you?
Why was it that you were able to get up to go to work and she was having these difficulties getting up, going to work during this time period? What was going on?
I would go to sleep and she wouldn't be there, so I just was kind of making sure that I could get a paycheck at that point, so I just kind of let her be her own person, of course. Well, not let her, but you know, she would do whatever she did, and I would make sure that the kids were taken care of and that I'd make it to work at least somewhat on time.
So there are times you go to sleep at night so that you're able to get up for work and she's not there.
There were times like that, yeah.
And would she talk to you about where she had been?
I never asked.
Now, let's go back to that text message to Michelle. Before you sent that text message to Michelle, had you been planning on taking the 3 children to Michelle's house that morning?
Yeah, the plan was because we missed the day before of work for her tooth removal, and we both were scheduled for the next day for a shift. The plan was to drop the kids off and go to work with her.
Furthermore, Daniel left Savannah the day after participating in an FBI-bugged hotel room sting with Leilani and never returned. The defense argued that Leilani's steadfast adherence to the Origel story, even when it was clearly false, could be explained if Daniel had invented it and coached her to stick to it. Leilani, they suggested, might have been covering for him. The jury was left to weigh a mountain of circumstantial evidence against the stark absence of a definitive cause of death. They had to decide if Leilani's constant lying and suspicious behavior were proof of a calculated killer, or the panicked actions of a high, neglectful mother caught in a tragic accident she couldn't explain. After deliberating for 6 hours, they reached a decision. The jury foreman handed the verdict to the bailiff. Leilani Simon, who had remained stoic and largely emotionless throughout the trial, stood to hear her fate. On the charge of malice murder, the foreman read the verdict: guilty. The word was repeated for each of the 18 other counts she faced, from felony murder to concealing a death and making false statements. She was found guilty on all of them. Judge Tammy Stokes sentenced Leilani to life in prison. However, she granted her the possibility of parole, a decision that signaled the judge may have shared some of the questions about the absolute certainty of murder versus a lesser offense. With an additional 10 years tacked on for other charges, Leilani Simon would have to serve a minimum of 40 years before she could even be considered for release. In the aftermath, the broken pieces of the family were scattered. Shortly after Leilani's conviction, her mother, Billie Jo Howell, applied for custody of Quinton's 2 surviving siblings, This move was met with public outcry, as many believed Billie Joe shared a portion of the blame. She had been granted custody to protect Quentin, but had left him in the care of the very person the state deemed unfit, a decision that proved fatal. The children were ultimately placed in foster care, removed from the cycle of neglect that had defined their early lives. To this day, Leilani Simon maintains her innocence from behind bars, writing letters to news stations claiming she was wrongly convicted on a case built without solid evidence. She has already motioned for a new trial. The story of Quentin Simon is a tragic testament to the fragility of innocence and the devastating consequences of systemic failure. He was a child known to be at risk, living in a volatile home with a mother who was emotionally unstable and battling addiction. He was given a legal guardian who, by her own admission, had failed her own daughter and who was absent when he needed her most. Quentin, a sweet boy who loved to give fist bumps he called booms, was failed by the very people who should have been his protectors. His death was not just the result of a single monstrous act, but the culmination of a long history of neglect, dysfunction, and darkness that lurked where a child should have only ever found safety and love.